I'm going to be here for a little while. If this is all successful, I'll see you in for season 6, and if it isn't, I won't. Take care, everyone.
30 years of being the man nothing could touch. His father died from this. His friend survived it. He screened for it, knowing the risk, knowing the family history, knowing exactly what he was watching for. And knowing did not matter. Because there is a particular cruelty in being taken down by the exact thing you spent years warning other men about. At that moment, in that field, everything he had built around being untouchable fell away. And what remained was just a man, waiting to find out if his ending would follow his father's or if the early detection had given him a different path. Before we dive in, if this kind of story moves you, take a second to subscribe to The Untold Story and hit the bell. We cover the real stories behind famous lives, the ones that go deeper than any headline ever will. Now, let's get into it. The 5th season of Clarkson's Farm began with an image that felt fundamentally wrong. Not metaphorically, not as a dramatic device constructed in the editing room. Jeremy Clarkson, the presenter, the provocateur, the man who once described himself as being built for speed and not endurance, was photographed in a hospital gown, tubes attached, looking exactly like someone who had been told by his body that 30 years of excess had accumulated a debt that was now coming due. That opening image opened the season. It was unsettling in a way that his audience was not accustomed to encountering. Clarkson in a hospital bed looked wrong the way that landmarks look wrong when you see them damaged. You know intellectually that they are not invincible, but you never quite believed it until you were forced to see it. Until the evidence was unavoidable and the denial became impossible. The image planted something in viewers without them fully realizing what was happening. A question they did not know they were asking. A low frequency of unease that ran beneath every subsequent episode. Underneath the tractor arguments, and the planning permission battles, and the magnificent perpetual chaos of trying to run a working farm with no agricultural background, and an absolute refusal to be told what to do by anyone who presumed to know better. Something had broken. The audience sensed it. They just did not know what it was yet. Beneath the surface of every episode that followed, that opening image created a current of dread that the narratives of the farm could not quite wash away. The fields looked the same. The arguments with Caleb looked the same. The endless machinery and the weather and the soil conditions and the 1,000 daily negotiations between ambition and reality all looked the same. But the viewer was watching now with the knowledge that something underneath had shifted. Something was wrong with the man at the center of everything. And the farm, in all its demands and its chaos, was simply continuing anyway, indifferent as always to human difficulty. And then came the final 2 episodes. Clarkson announced their arrival himself on Instagram in the middle of the night on June 17, 2026. He did not tease them with the language of excitement or anticipation. He warned his audience. Ordinarily, he wrote, we try to keep the show bucolic and charming and cheerful. But the final 2 episodes, which drop in the middle of the night tonight, are none of those things, really. They're a difficult watch. They're really, really difficult. That is not the language of a television presenter managing audience expectations according to the standard playbook. That is the language of a man who has been living with something for months and is now watching other people encounter it for the first time, bracing them for what he already knows they are about to feel. The world opened its streaming app and pressed play. To understand what that moment in the field would come to mean, you have to understand who Jeremy Clarkson is. Not the caricature, not the controversy, the man. Jeremy Charles Robert Clarkson was born on April 11, 1960, in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. He grew up in a household shaped by modest ambition and working-class pragmatism. His parents ran a business selling Paddington Bear toys, a detail so ordinary, so fundamentally at odds with the figure he would become, that it almost never makes it into the official biography. There was nothing in his early life that predicted the global phenomenon that was approaching. No prodigy, no exceptional academic record, no clear trajectory toward the kind of fame that would eventually make him one of the most recognized voices on British television. What there was, from the beginning, was a voice, an opinion, an absolute, almost pathological refusal to be boring. He found his way into motoring journalism in the 1980s, writing for local newspapers, contributing to trade publications, learning the craft of making readers feel something about machines they had never driven and probably never would. He discovered in himself a rare gift, the ability to make technical subjects feel personal. A car review in Clarkson's hands was never really about the car at all. It was about speed and freedom. It was about the particular kind of joy that comes from putting your foot down on an empty road at 5 o'clock in the morning and feeling, briefly, that the world belongs entirely to you. Top Gear changed everything. When Clarkson joined the relaunched Top Gear in 2002, the show was a competent but unremarkable motoring program with a modest audience. What it became under his influence was something else entirely. A global entertainment phenomenon that at its peak attracted 350 million viewers in 170 countries. Not because of the cars, because of him, because of the chemistry between Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. Three men who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company in a way that television usually only pretends to manufacture. Because of the stunts, the arguments, the spectacular, gleeful willingness to break things and offend people and ask for forgiveness, never. He became the loudest man on British television, possibly the loudest man on any television. The controversies arrived with the success, as they always do. He wrote columns that generated complaints by the thousands. He made jokes that landed badly, and jokes that landed perfectly, and several that are still being debated today. In 2015, he was dismissed from the BBC following a physical altercation with a producer over a catering dispute, an incident so mundane in its origin and so enormous in its consequences that it seemed to perfectly capture the particular quality of Clarkson's chaos. He did not go quietly. He and Hammond and May signed with Amazon Prime Video and created The Grand Tour, which became one of the platform's most watched programs. By every available measure, he was untouchable, built to last forever, incapable of being slowed down. And then, in 2019, he did something that surprised everyone who thought they had him figured out. He bought a farm, not as an investment strategy, not as a tax maneuver, as a genuine, wildly underprepared attempt to do something with his hands. Diddley Squat Farm in Chipping Norton, Oxfordshire, 436 acres that he freely admitted he had absolutely no idea how to manage. He hired Caleb Cooper, a young farmer who was the walking embodiment of everything Clarkson was not: patient, practical, rooted, deeply connected to the land and the rhythms that govern it. The dynamic between them became the engine of one of the most unexpectedly moving television series of the decade. Clarkson's Farm premiered in 2021. Critics were surprised. Audiences were captivated. The man who had spent 30 years being the most abrasive presence on British screens turned out, when placed in a context that humbled him, to be genuinely, disarmingly human. But before any of that humbling could teach him what he needed to know, there was something else. Something that he could not escape. Something written into his family's story in a way that no amount of shouting or refusing to listen could change. Jeremy Clarkson had been sounding the alarm about prostate cancer for years. Not in the detached, carefully worded way that celebrities sometimes adopt when lending their name to a cause. Not the one appearance at a charity gala, polished press statement with a ribbon. The way he did everything else, directly, personally, with the blunt force of a man who had seen the damage up close and could not understand why other men were not paying attention. He had watched too many friends receive the diagnosis. Men his age, men who had felt fine, men who had no obvious symptoms, men who had assumed that silence from the body meant safety. He understood, in a way that only proximity to illness teaches you, that prostate cancer does not announce itself the way other threats do. It does not arrive with pain and urgency and the unmistakable signal that something is profoundly wrong. It develops slowly, quietly, in tissue that most men never think about until they are given a reason to. By the time it makes itself known without a test, it has often already done significant work. So he talked about it. He urged men, particularly men over 50, particularly men with a family history of the disease, to get the PSA blood test, prostate-specific antigen, a simple blood draw that can flag elevated levels requiring further investigation. Not a perfect test, not a diagnosis by itself, but a starting point, a reason to look closer. The kind of basic, low-cost, low-barrier action that can mean the difference between catching something early and catching it late. He knew about family history because he lived with one. His father died of prostate cancer. That fact does not require embellishment. It sits in the biography with the quiet, permanent weight of something that cannot be undone. It is the kind of fact that reshapes everything around it. Clarkson grew up watching his father's illness, absorbing the knowledge that this particular disease had already written itself into his family's story once. That the genetic conversation between father and son does not end at the grave. That some inheritances are not property or money or the color of your eyes. They are risk, predisposition. The elevated probability that the same story will find you if you are not watching for it. He was watching for it. By his own account, Clarkson underwent regular screening precisely because of his father's history. He understood the numbers. 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer during their lifetime. That risk rises significantly with age. Approximately 6 in 10 diagnoses occur in men 65 and older. It rises further with family history. Clarkson was in every high-risk category that exists. And then there was Gerald. Gerald Cooper is one of the most beloved figures to have emerged from Clarkson's farm. A farmer in his mid-70s with a West Country accent so thick that the production team briefly considered subtitles, and a dry, unhurried dignity that became one of the quiet anchors of the entire series. In the 3rd season, Gerald's own prostate cancer diagnosis became part of the program's narrative. The cameras were there. The audience watched. Gerald went through his treatment with the same undemonstrative steadiness that he brought to everything else. And in June of 2024, he was declared cancer-free. Clarkson had watched that too. He had been in Gerald's orbit as Gerald navigated a diagnosis, a treatment, and a recovery. He had seen what the process looked like. He had seen that it was survivable when caught in time. He had, in some ways, been given a preview of a path. One path among the available outcomes. And then, in May, during the filming of what would become the 5th season of Clarkson's Farm, in the midst of a harvest that would not wait, and a schedule that had no room for disruption, the biopsy results came back. Clarkson describes what happened with characteristic economy. He had noticed something. He had not wanted to deal with it during filming. He describes disappearing off for a while, slipping away from the production, from the farm, from the rolling machinery of a television series in progress, to have the biopsy done. And then waiting, and then knowing. "I've known since May," he told Caleb and Charlie in that field, in that conversation that had started as a discussion about the harvest. Think about what that means. He had known since May. The filming continued. The farm work continued. The arguments about tractors and planning permission and soil conditions and the 100 other urgent, irreplaceable demands of running a working farm, all of it continued while Clarkson carried the knowledge alone, or nearly alone. He told the people who needed to know. He managed the information the way he manages most difficult things, by refusing to let it stop the work. The diagnosis was aggressive. That word matters more than it might initially sound. Prostate cancer exists on a spectrum, and the grade assigned to it, the Gleason score, which measures how abnormal the cancer cells look under a microscope, determines the urgency of the response. An aggressive cancer is not one that can be monitored with watchful waiting, with periodic testing, and the hope that it moves slowly enough to manage. An aggressive cancer requires action. It requires treatment. It requires that the timeline of the harvest and the timeline of the illness be reckoned with together, because one of them is not going to wait for the other. But it was early. He said that too. Aggressive, but really early. Those 4 words carry the full weight of why screening matters. The cancer had not had time to spread. The prostate had not yet surrendered entirely. Clarkson would later describe it by saying that 10% of it was dead. Specifically, the 10% where the cancer was. The margins were real. The options were still open. He had been praying, he said, that they could get the harvest done before he had to stop for treatment. The cancer had other plans. When the thing you have spent years warning others about finally arrives at your own door, what do you do with that? There is a specific kind of grief that comes not from surprise, but from recognition. When Jeremy Clarkson received his diagnosis in May, he was not encountering prostate cancer as a stranger. He was encountering it as someone who had been introduced to it before through his father's death, through Gerald's illness, through the years of advocacy and warning and urging men to look before the looking became urgent. He knew what it was. He knew what it could do. And he knew, with the particular clarity that family history provides, that this moment had always been a possibility, perhaps even a probability. For months, he had lived a double life. The man on camera, still being the loudest voice in the room. The man in private, carrying knowledge that his body had written a new script he could not refuse. The farm continued. The cameras continued. The entire machinery of production rolled forward on a timeline that Clarkson had to maintain, had to sustain, had to keep secret, until the moment when secrets became impossible to keep. And then came June 17th, 2026. Somewhere in a field at Diddley Squat Farm, in the middle of a conversation about the harvest that needed to happen and the timeline that was running out, Jeremy Clarkson leaned back and said the 3 words that made everything else stop. "I've got cancer." To understand what that moment meant, you have to understand the context surrounding it. The cameras were rolling. Caleb Cooper was standing beside him. The final 2 episodes of Season 5 were about to premiere on Amazon Prime Video at midnight. Clarkson had already warned his audience on Instagram that they were about to watch something difficult. And now, in this field, in real time, without warning, without preparation, he was delivering the confirmation of what the audience had been sensing but could not quite articulate. Caleb Cooper's reaction, "No, you haven't. Where?" is not the reaction of a man who has been briefed. It is the genuine, unscripted shock of someone receiving information they had not anticipated. The farm had been carrying Clarkson's secret for months, and now, in the middle of a conversation about logistics and timelines, the secret became shared. "Where it is," Clarkson said, "is of no concern of anybody." That line is very Clarkson. The impulse to deflect, to redirect attention, to refuse to be defined by the vulnerability of the moment. but the deflection lasted approximately 3 seconds, because the next thing he said removed every layer of performance and left only the fact. "I've known since May. I disappeared off the other week, and I had a biopsy. And it is cancer, and it's aggressive, but it's really early." Aggressive, but really early. His father's cancer, presumably, was not caught early enough. Otherwise, the story would have ended differently. Gerald's cancer was caught and treated, and for a time, declared resolved. Clarkson's cancer was caught by the regular screening he had committed to precisely because of his father's history. At the stage where early is still a meaningful word, where the margins still exist, where the options still include the possibility of a different ending, there is no gratitude quite like the gratitude of a man who knows exactly what the alternative looks like. He wanted to finish the harvest first. That detail is so perfectly, almost painfully, Clarkson, that it functions as character revelation without needing any commentary. The harvest had to happen. The farm had obligations that did not pause for illness, the rhythms of agriculture, the absolute non-negotiable tyranny of the growing season, the harvesting window, the soil conditions, the weather, do not accommodate personal crisis. Clarkson had absorbed this truth deeply enough in the years since he bought Diddley Squat Farm to feel it as a genuine constraint rather than an excuse. He was praying, he said, that the harvest could be done before treatment had to begin. It was not. The cancer did not wait for the harvest. The treatment was going to fall, as he put it, slap bang in the middle. The farm was going to have to manage without him for a portion of the season that could not be rescheduled. The body had its own deadline now, and that deadline outranked everything else. His father had faced this disease and lost. His friend had faced it, and at least for a time, won. Now Jeremy Clarkson, the man who had spent his entire public life refusing to be afraid of anything, was about to find out which story was his. Surgery is the moment when everything abstract becomes physical. You can know about a diagnosis intellectually. You can understand the medical terminology, research the statistics, consult the specialists, absorb the information with the systematic thoroughness of a man who has spent decades being paid to know things about complicated subjects. You can carry the knowledge for weeks and still maintain, at some functional level, the sense that you are still the same person you were before the results arrived. And then they put you under, and when you wake up, the compartment is gone. Clarkson underwent surgery to remove a portion of his prostate. The procedure of a partial prostatectomy targeting the cancerous tissue represents one of the primary treatment pathways for prostate cancer caught at an early, localized stage. When the cancer has not spread beyond the prostate itself, surgical removal of the affected tissue offers the possibility of a complete resolution. The word the medical community uses is cure, not management, not maintenance. Cure. The possibility that the cancer, once removed, does not return. That the chapter closes rather than continues. But surgery is not a guarantee. It is a procedure with outcomes that exist on a spectrum, performed on a body, with its own particular history and its own particular responses. And the results are not always clean. Complications exist. They are discussed in the consent forms and the preoperative consultations and the carefully measured language of surgical teams who have learned to prepare patients for the possibility that the path from the operating table to the recovery room is not always straight. For Jeremy Clarkson, it was not straight. He experienced complications during treatment. He has not detailed their precise nature publicly, and that restraint is his right. The medical specifics belong to the category of information that is of no concern of anybody, to use his own phrase. What he did share is the fact of the complications and the location in which he shared it. not in a press statement, not in a carefully managed interview designed to control the narrative. In the final episode of Clarkson's Farm, Season 5, in a hospital bed, on camera, the circularity of that image is almost too precise to feel accidental, except that it was entirely accidental, which is what makes it devastating. Season 5 began with Jeremy Clarkson in a hospital bed. That opening image, the tubes, the gown, the uncomfortable stillness of a man who is never still, had planted its unease in the audience and then receded as the season progressed. The farm demanded attention. Caleb demanded attention. The harvest and the weather and the planning permissions and the 100 daily negotiations between ambition and reality that define life at Diddley Squat Farm. All of it pulled focus forward toward the work, away from whatever had put Clarkson in that bed at the beginning. And then, in the final episode, he was back in a bed. Different bed, different hospital, different reason. But the image rhymed with itself in a way that the most skilled screenwriter could not have constructed. Because the most skilled screenwriter would have been told it was too neat, too symbolic, too obviously shaped like the kind of narrative symmetry that life very rarely actually provides. Life provided it anyway. "We started Season 5 with me in a hospital bed," Clarkson said, speaking from that second bed in the final minutes of the final episode. "And here we are at the end of Season 5, and I'm back in a hospital bed." He said it with the delivery he uses for everything, dry, direct, without performance. The flatness of his delivery is not indifference. It has never been indifference. It is the particular voice of a man who has decided that the only dignified response to things that are genuinely terrible is to describe them as plainly as possible and let the plainness do the work. He described the outcome with almost clinical precision. 10% of his prostate was dead, the 10% where the cancer was. The surgery had targeted it. The affected tissue was gone. But whether the surgery had done what surgery is supposed to do, whether the removal had been complete, whether the margins were clean, whether the cancer was truly, permanently gone rather than temporarily interrupted, that question did not yet have an answer. It would not have an answer until November. Probably, that word, probably, carries the full weight of what it means to live in the aftermath of a cancer diagnosis. The medicine moves at its own pace. The body heals on its own timeline. The tests that measure whether the treatment worked are not immediate. PSA levels must be monitored after surgery, tracked across months, observed for patterns that either confirm the absence of the cancer or suggest its persistence. The waiting is not a bureaucratic inconvenience. It is a medical necessity. And it is one of the most difficult things that a man who has spent his entire life in motion is asked to do. Jeremy Clarkson was asked to wait. What Clarkson did in sharing this story the way he chose to share it, not in a press release, not in a managed interview, not in the carefully constructed narrative of a celebrity health update, was something more lasting than a simple health announcement. He made prostate cancer visible in a place where it had never been visible before, not as an abstraction, not as a statistic or a charity campaign or a ribbon on a lapel, as the thing that happened to a specific man in a specific field in the middle of a conversation about the harvest while the cameras were rolling and Caleb Cooper's face was saying everything that words could not. He put the diagnosis in a place where men who would never attend a health awareness event, who would never read a medical pamphlet, who would never voluntarily engage with the subject, will encounter it. Because they are watching Clarkson's Farm. Because they love Clarkson's Farm. Because they have spent 5 seasons watching Jeremy Clarkson fail at agriculture in the most compelling possible way. And now, in the final 2 episodes of the 5th season, They are watching him face something that none of his previous failures had prepared him for. The 6th season of Clarkson's Farm is scheduled for 2027. That sentence carries more weight than it would have carried 6 months ago. A production schedule is not a medical prognosis. It is not a guarantee, but it is something. It is a statement of intent, a commitment to a future that is being planned for, prepared for, built toward. The fact that Amazon Prime Video and Jeremy Clarkson and the entire extended family of Diddley Squat Farm are already looking toward 2027 is the farm continuing. It is Caleb still arguing about tractors. It is the fields at Chipping Norton cycling through another season, indifferent as they always are to the human drama unfolding among them. The farm does not wait, and neither, apparently, does Jeremy Clarkson. But between now and November, there is something that cannot be resolved by will or work, or the particular force of personality that has carried him through every previous crisis. There is the waiting, the PSA monitoring, the periodic blood draws, and the results and the conversation with the medical team that will tell him eventually whether the surgery accomplished what surgery is supposed to accomplish. He does not know yet. He said so plainly, without the comfort of false certainty. He will know probably in November. That word, probably, is a grace note of honesty in a culture that is desperately uncomfortable with medical uncertainty. We want resolution. We want the story to have a clean ending. The treatment worked. The man is fine. The audience can exhale and move on. Clarkson denied his audience that ending, not because he was being cruel, but because that ending did not exist yet. And he has never been a man who manufactures comfort at the expense of truth. He spent 30 years telling men to go get checked. He spent decades warning that the absence of symptoms is not the same as the absence of disease. He watched his father and then Gerald and carried the knowledge of what this illness does to a man. And then it came for him anyway in May, in the middle of a season, slap bang in the middle of everything. And he told his audience, not because he owed them the information, but because withholding it would have been a kind of cowardice that Jeremy Clarkson is constitutionally incapable of. If you are a man over 50, if you have a father or a brother who has faced this disease, if you have ever put off the appointment because you felt fine, because there were no symptoms, because you assumed that the absence of pain meant the absence of danger, the one thing Jeremy Clarkson is asking you to do right now is the simplest thing he has ever asked of anyone. Make the appointment. Take the test. Do not wait until the conversation about the harvest turns into something else entirely. The farm will still be there when you get back. At 66, Jeremy Clarkson revealed his prostate cancer diagnosis to the world in the final 2 episodes of Clarkson's Farm Season 5, which premiered on Amazon Prime Video on June 17, 2026. He is currently recovering from surgery and awaiting PSA results expected in November. A man who spent 30 years being the loudest voice in every room discovered, on a farm that humbled him, what it meant to be silent. And then, when he had to speak about the hardest thing he has ever faced, he did it in a field, on camera, without performance, without comfort, without the shield of irony that has protected him through decades of controversy. The legacy he leaves in this moment goes far beyond the immediate conversation about his health. It is the visibility he created for a disease that kills quietly, that announces itself slowly, that can be caught if you are watching for it. It is the proof that screening works, that his regular PSA tests, motivated by his father's history, caught his cancer at a stage where the word early still held meaning. It is the reminder that knowledge without action is just words, that his decades of advocacy meant nothing until the moment he became the witness, instead of just the voice warning from a distance. He is waiting now. The farm is waiting with him. The cameras will roll again when the time comes. Season 6 is scheduled for 2027, a commitment to a future that remains uncertain but is being built toward anyway. That is perhaps the most Clarkson thing of all. The refusal to pause, the insistence on continuing, the knowledge that the harvest waits for no man, and neither does the living of a life. Which part of Jeremy Clarkson's story moved you most? His willingness to be vulnerable on camera, his advocacy for screening, or his refusal to give the audience false comfort? Drop it in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, make sure you check out our video on Peabo Bryson's Untold Story, because that one is about a man whose voice touched millions of lives and whose legacy continues in ways he never got to see. Right here on The Untold Story. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that deserves to be told.